Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to tune into our masterclass on self-advocacy in the workplace. This is the fifth masterclass of a series that we will be delivering over the coming months as part of our partnership with IrishJobs.ie. At the launch event of our partnership on the 1st of April, we revealed our collaborative report, Autism in the Workplace, which evidenced that almost 4 in 5 autistic people face barriers to employment in Ireland. While it's currently estimated that at least 1 in 65 people in Ireland are autistic, we are still seeing that 85% of autistic people are unemployed or underemployed. IrishJobs.ie and AsIAm come together to champion autistic talent in the workplace in an effort to address these barriers in practical, strategic ways so that employers can gain the knowledge needed to support autistic and neurodiverse employees. Today, we will be hearing from AsIAM's Training and Access Officer, Adrian Carroll, with input from our guest speakers, Elaine Chapman and Danny Burke. There'll be time at the end of the masterclass for questions, so please do type any questions that you have into the Q&A box during the webinar and we'll address them at the end. Our first speaker that we'll hear from is Adrian Carroll. So Adrian has been working with AsIAM since July 2019 as a training officer before becoming Training and Accessibility Officer in January 2021. He supports the development and delivery of online autism training for businesses and organisations who are seeking how best to support autistic clients and customers. In addition to this, he also advises companies and organisations on how they can make their practices more inclusive for autistic people. From Killarney, County Kerry, Adrian's main background is in law and policy. He has a BCL in Law plus History and Cultural Studies from the University of Limerick, along with an LLM degrees in Law from the UL and in International and Comparative Disability Law and Policy from NUI Galway. He also has professional experience working in legal support in Brosnan & Co Solicitors, which is a local solicitor's office in Killarney. Adrian also works with the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. He sits on their Disability Advisory Committee, comprising over half its members with lived experience of disability to monitor how the convention will become law in Ireland and how society can be more equal and inclusive for people with disabilities in Ireland. So I'm delighted to present to you my esteemed colleague, Adrian Carroll. Take it away, Adrian.
Yeah, so thank you, Hannah, for your lovely introduction. So basically, what the theme of today's masterclass is going to be around the topic of autistic self-advocacy in the workplace. So basically what we'll try and cover in today's presentation is kind of like a number of topics. And whilst they aren't always kind of connected in the most, while they don't always kind of connect so I guess that kind of covers across a number of things. So basically it's around what self-advocacy is, how that kind of relates with the social model of disability and with neurodiversity, the importance of self-advocacy at work. So what are kind of particular barriers to self-advocacy that autistic people experience, particular issues around things like disclosure, which can often be an issue, which can often be kind of the main link in which autistic people can self-advocate at work, and also can be a main way to access supports. Also, kind of issues I was going to cover as well would be around autistic masking and burnout, which can be key issues which impact a person's ability to advocate for themselves at work. How an autistic person can be supported at work, and what else can I support an autistic person to advocate for themselves at work. Just to kind of move on to like a quick definition around self-advocacy. Self-advocacy in its basic form is sort of advocating for yourself and expressing what your needs are. So this can kind of take lots of different forms. So that might be, for instance, it might be kind of telling somebody that you might be autistic, or you might need to take you might need to take leave, or even kind of asking about certain workplace issues. So we all kind of advocate for ourselves all the time we're at work. It's completely natural to a lot of people as it's part and parcel of what we do at work. But I think it's a really important topic for us to kind of consider as well, because there's lots of different ways in which we communicate, and there's lots of different communication forms that we can use to self-advocacy. So it can range from getting access to services and supports, requesting supports and accommodation at work, or participating in team meetings or in communities at work. But it can also kind of it also kind of look at like some of the wider issues that impact autistic people, and pushing for, and also kind of pushing for changes to how we work to accommodate and support autistic people as well. There is no right or wrong way to be a self-advocate. I think we all kind of, we all advocate for ourselves and for our needs in different ways. So by that same token, there isn't really a rule book in which you can advocate, you can really kind of be a self-advocate at work. So we all kind of find different means and different ways and means in which we can advocate for ourselves. But I think the main kind of issue, and I think also by that same token, self-advocacy isn't just about our needs and our desires as autistic people. We also have to look at how we can kind of fit our needs within the wider organization, and also in terms of what do other people need, and what other people's kind of desires as well, and also how we can kind of mutually kind of meet these needs as well. So I guess the main kind of principles, first principles, I think the main things that make self-advocacy work would be to accept an autistic person for who they are, knowing what their strengths and support needs are, and also kind of being seen as a key part of your organization, and are seen as a valued member that contributes to your organization's work. So I think there's a great tradition of self-advocacy in the disability community. It particularly kind of originated around the communities around intellectual disability and autism in particular, because I think that those are often, and I think it also kind of sums up what ultimately kind of sums up the tradition of self-advocacy is the disability rights mantra of nothing about us without us. So that statement basically kind of says as well that if you want to make decisions that impact autistic and disabled people, then it's really important to include autistic people and disabled people in making those decisions, and ideally to have our involvement from the outset to make sure that we can reach the best solution for that mutually meets the needs of not just autistic people and disabled people, but across the wider organization and society as a whole. So I guess this also kind of links into the way to kind of how self-advocacy kind of is linked to the social model of disabilities. This is kind of a paradigm shift in the way that we think about disability. So the idea of having disability, a lot of the ways that we kind of would have particularly perceived disability is that often we would have professionals, or we'd have, let's say, parents or carers kind of speak for ourselves and speak for our needs. And while they still play an important role, I think that what's been kind of a major sea change around autistic people is just that more people feel more comfortable about being able to share their experiences and to advocate for our rights and for our needs as well. So what the social model of disability also kind of sees as well is that society, certain ways of how we structure and how we organize society can have a disabling impact on people with disabilities, and this includes autistic people as well. So it frames disability away from traditional narratives that sees disabled people as objects of pity or charity, and it kind of frames disability around the idea of empowerment and self-advocacy as a core value of autistic people being able to express themselves and being able to exercise their rights. So it ensures that it also ensures that people with disabilities have rights. They have the right to advocate for themselves, to make decisions that affect their lives, and take part in all facets of societies that we are interested in. So everybody in society has a role in addressing barriers to inclusion for autistic people. And it also kind of reflects how not just a person's impairment or difference has an impact on their own lives, but also how they might interact with social and environmental barriers, and how those issues, so that might be in terms of kind of job opportunities, in terms of kind of accessible buildings, then it could be kind of like the cumulative impact of exclusion and isolation as well, and how they all impact about how autistic people might feel comfortable being able to advocate for themselves, which also has a knock-on impact on how they might be included in society. I think moving on to that as well is kind of a similar topic. It's around the concept of neurodiversity. So this kind of first run about in a pamphlet that Jim Sinclair wrote called Don't Moan for Us. So that kind of played a role in terms of starting to shift the narrative around autism as well. So the term itself was originally coined by an autistic psychologist named Judy Singer in 1990. So it's basic in 1999. So basically, it's kind of centers around the belief that there isn't necessarily a right or a normal type of brain in the same way that we don't really kind of look so much around having a right or no type or normal type of body. So we need lots of different types of thinking in society. And it sees lots of different types of brains as an essential part of human diversity. So these include not just include conditions like autism, but it also includes ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Adrian. Keep going, you're fine. We can hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so it's so it kind of sees lots of different types of brains as an essential part of human diversity. So these are all called neurotypes. So it sees autism and other conditions as both a difference and as a disability. It recognizes it, and it also kind of centers around the person's strengths as well as their challenges or barriers that they experience. So there's also kind of a number of terms that autistic people would use, for instance, neurodivergent. So this means that a person's thoughts or actions might diverge from typical types of thinking that society would expect, and also in terms of neurotypical, and where a person's thoughts or actions might fall within typical patterns of thinking. I think as a sort of slightly quick note of language as well, with the social model and disability and neurodiversity as well, there are some groups within the disability community that have a preference for person-first language and a preference for identity-first language. So what identity-first language is kind of placing the identity before the person. So it's autistic person or disabled person that's really important within that's really important, as well as and I think as opposed to person with disability or person with autism. So why is self-advocacy important at work? So self-advocacy can be hugely important to a person's success at work. So it can empower, so if it's used well, it can empower an autistic person to perform to their best. It can support an autistic person to determine their needs at work and find ways of putting supports in place. It can help an autistic person to build confidence and self-esteem. I think also what's really important as well, it can also kind of build people's confidence to pursue opportunities at their work or to navigate unpredictable or fast-changing situations. It can also help to, I suppose, to subvert or to challenge assumptions or stereotypes that we might all have around autism. For instance, we might have assumptions that autistic people might like to work in particular industries or might have to work in a particular way. So again, it all kind of reflects on about a person's lived experience about being autistic. So it also kind of centers around that, well, we all know what we need better than anybody else guessing. So it's just kind of finding ways of sort of expressing and making sure that people can understand that being able to accommodate our needs at work is an important way of us being able to perform to our best. So communication in the workplace, again, is really important. So autistic people might find communication difficult, or they might prefer to communicate in different ways than autistic people. So I guess it's kind of that. There's some autistic people that might have a preference of being candid or being straight talking at work, And that might work in some situations, but might not always work in others. Whereas conversely, neurotypical people might prefer to kind of to place less of an emphasis on the words that we say, and more from kind of body language or from unspoken social cues. I think what's also and sometimes this can lead to and sometimes because of these differences in communications, we can sometimes miss each other's cues, and this can kind of lead to the double empathy problem. I think other things that are really important to look at is our own confidence and our own kind of perception of ourselves are hugely important and can significantly impact our own ability to communicate. And also that listening is also a fundamental aspect of communication in terms of being able to kind of pick up what other people say and being able to respond to that. So that's also really important. Communication in the workplace may not always be clear. So I think that's also a really important kind of that's a really important issue that autistic people might experience. So that can range from the use of jargon or the use of acronyms or corporate buzzwords. For instance, if you kind of say to people, if you wanted to look at, say, circle back, for instance, or other kind of buzzwords as well, they may not always be clear to an autistic person who might not always. But even it might also not be clear to a neurotypical person because it might also be because those words can often have an implied meaning as well. I think parts of tasks might be implied, might be presumed or left unsaid. So if you're to kind of say to people that let's say if you're asked to say photocopy a certain thing, but they might not say who we need to give the photocopies to, then that could be really confusing to an autistic person because we don't really know where is this capacity supposed to go. We're supposed to then it's kind of left to ourselves to interpret where do we have to kind of fill in the blanks in a given situation. Other kind of things as well is that autistic employees might prefer to use written communication or other kind of forms of communication. For instance, some people might be non-speaking, for instance, and might have a preference for using things like speech to text. And other people might also kind of have a preference for using things like instant messages or email as well, and as they might kind of find it more comfortable or more easier to kind of to predict or to process the words that they're going to say as well. I think another kind of key challenge as well is that autistic people may fear that advocating for themselves and communicating their needs may lead to them being ridiculed and misunderstood. And I think that's a really common feeling that a lot of people at work kind of experience. And I think also as well, some people might be stressed around how much social interaction they might have to do with colleagues or clients and customers. So it really kind of goes to emphasize how big of a role that communication has to play in the way that we work today. I think in terms of office or kind of workplace politics, it may not always come natural to an autistic person to play the game, so to speak. So I think that there's some autistic people might feel a pressure to fit in or to be a part of something that we might not necessarily feel okay or they might not necessarily feel comfortable with. Other people might not necessarily kind of like chit chat or small talk, for instance, conversations about the weather or something, or conversations around what happened at work in terms of kind of office banter or gossip might be stressful for an autistic person because they might necessarily because some people might not necessarily know how to react in a certain situation. I think equally what can be kind of perceived as sort of safe workplace conversations, like where you went on holidays or what kind of program that you watched last night as well. It might not always align with an autistic person's interests, so they might not always kind of feel they might not always kind of pick up cues as well. And I think other things that might be really important as well is that some autistic people might not always interpret social rules in a way that might be typical for a neurotypical person, and some people might kind of come across as quite blunt even though they might be honest about what they say. And I think that's also kind of really important in terms of kind of saying that kind of lies into, I guess, the differences in communication between what an autistic person might think is appropriate or versus what neurotypical might prefer as well. Whilst autistic traits shouldn't necessarily reflect the person's ability to do a job, they can have an impact on how other people judge how autistic people can contribute. So I think it kind of leads as well to the lack of so I guess it's the lack of understanding of autistic traits that can cause problems at work. Then other things that kind of that might be important to kind of take into account is the sensory impact of social gatherings. For instance, if you're kind of suggest that you might go through after work drinks, it might be in, let's say, a noisy pub or a noisy restaurant. I think it also kind of plays into the back is that kind of returning to normal may not always kind of fit everyone's needs, and it may not always be suitable for autists. It may not always be what an autistic person might want, for instance. So yeah, I guess it's also kind of taking that into account, or even kind of something like group activities. For instance, if you might have, like, say, a social club or a club in which you might play tag rugby or soccer, for instance, they might not always be kind of, while that can be a really important way for groups or teams to bond, they may not always accommodate autistic people. So I think that's really important to kind of it's a really important kind of factor to consider. So I think just to kind of quickly cover kind of self-advocacy at work. So not being able to disclose a person's disability is a huge barrier, as well as talking to care. And I think the idea of talking to colleagues or managers around access needs can be really intimidating. Having to mask or camouflage autistic traits, having to deal with sort of outdated perceptions and attitudes around autism can be a huge factor as well. Then kind of going into sort of differences in terms of communication styles, that they might not always be acknowledged or accepted. I think another thing that would be kind of considered as well is that autistic people may not always be the most confident or self-assured. So I think that's really important in terms of kind of how that might also have an effect on how autistic people can kind of advocate for themselves at work. Then other kind of factors that would have an impact as well would be kind of interpreting workplace rules or norms differently, not knowing if needs would be accommodated to disclose. And I guess also another thing would be to kind of look at like executive functioning differences. So autistic people might have a different way or planning or organizing, let's say, how they wish to self-advocate, and that would also kind of have an impact as well. So I think other things that will kind of have that would also be really important would be to kind of look at would be that autistic people and disabled people are more likely to experience discrimination and prejudice. So then there's also kind of an expectancy that if I advocate my need, there might be an assumption as well that my needs would not be considered or rejected. So that also kind of has an impact on the decision to disclose being autistic. And then there's other kind of issues as well. There's the fear. There's also kind of dealing with sort of internalized stigma or negative perceptions of ourselves. And also in terms of kind of how do we sort of deal with how other people might react to advocating our needs. So I think that's really important in terms of sort of addressing some of the barriers to inclusion as well. I think just to kind of quickly cover disclosure, because I think disclosure can often be at the root of an autistic person's ability to advocate for themselves. So it can be a huge barrier to self-advocacy, but it can be a really personal decision as well that can take a great deal of confidence as well. And it can also be a major way to access support. So some people might prefer not to disclose being autistic, and that's completely their prerogative. But some of the reasons that might kind of lead to this might be fear and discrimination, fear in other people's judgment or attitudes, and some people might just have a preference for keeping it private. So I guess to kind of look at masking as well is just that masking is where an autistic person kind of camouflages their autistic traits to fit in or to appear more neurotypical. So this can kind of include things like social scripts, making eye contact, or suppressing kind of autistic traits, for instance, like stimming. It can lead, I think, whilst it can be helpful in certain situations, it can leave autistic people to feel physically or mentally or emotionally exhausted. So as a result, employers shouldn't necessarily expect to encourage or an autistic person to mask at work. And I think it's also kind of saying that to autistic people that it is so completely okay for autistic people to be their autistic selves at work. I think going hand in hand with that is autistic burnouts. That's kind of a state of intense physical or emotional exhaustion that kind of often comes as a consequence of burnout, of masking, should I say. And an autistic person's experience of burnout can often vary from person to person. So this can be kind of a loss of executive functioning abilities. It can be an overwhelming sense of physical or mental exhaustion, experience of sensory overload, a temporary loss of skills, or being more sensitive to environments, for example, the office or the workplace in general as well. So how can autistic people be supported at work? So again, it kind of looks at the interplay between accommodating the employees' needs versus accommodating the needs of your wider team and your colleagues. So lots of these things can also, and other things that you can kind of consider would be kind of in terms of sensory processing. What does an autistic person might need to regulate themselves at work? How do they prefer to communicate at work? How they might express how they feel about themselves, for instance. It kind of goes into interoception and also executive functioning as well. So it also kind of, how does an autistic person be supported at work? So autistic people can thrive at work if their managers or colleagues accept them for who they are and embrace neurodiversity. So that includes sort of like an openness for autistic people to be to sort of learn about their strengths and their support needs, to accommodate an autistic person's needs while they're at work. It also kind of includes sort of listening to and respecting autistic people. And I think the most important thing to also kind of look at would be an autism-friendly workplace is a people-friendly workplace, and it is a workplace that embraces and that celebrates different types of bodies and minds and different ways of working as well. So it also, other things that you can kind of do to support an autistic person at work would be to encourage an employee to express their strengths and support needs, and to be open about their autistic identity if they feel comfortable. Making processes around the disclosure process to be predictable, making sure that an autistic person gets any support they need at work. Plan with the employee if they're experiencing something new or unpredictable or unexpected. And then there's other kind of things that you can also use tools that can help with this, will help an autistic person to advocate for themselves at work. So these can include things like reasonable accommodation passports or self-reflection workbooks as well, that the good people that thrive in autistic have produced as well. So in terms of other things you can kind of do to support an autistic person to these skills would be to take a positive approach to autism disability, to create a culture where an autistic person can feel confident and comfortable to disclose, being sure that there's providing lots of opportunities to disclose and just to kind of let employees know that they can offer support at any time that a person wishes to disclose. Having a discussion around what accommodations are available, setting expectations about as to when accommodations might be put in place. But other things you can kind of do as well would be to promote kind of different kind of career pathways as well that might not necessarily kind of follow the more traditional ways of working as well. Respecting and accepting an autistic person's communication choices, giving a person advance notice of when meetings or events happen. I think not taking offense if an autistic person prefers not to engage in small talk or office politics is really important as well, because I think that can help an autistic person to be more comfortable and be open about themselves at work. Don't expect an autistic person to make eye contact if they feel uncomfortable. But I think a really fundamental way that you can help an autistic person to advocate for themselves at work is to treat people with respect, try to keep things positive, and don't treat them any differently to any other colleague whilst they're at work. I think other things you can kind of do would be to kind of be non-judgmental, to set clear expectations at work, and to consider the impact the sensory environment might have on how an autistic person might advocate for themselves. Be clear, be concise, and be specific when you're giving instructions at work. So that might range from having communications put in writing to giving step-by-step guides or instructions as well. So, and I think it's really important as well to give an autistic person as much information in advance as possible. Be mindful and be considerate that an autistic person might not always appear confident or self-assured, and they might need a little bit of extra help or support to advocate for themselves at work. Provide lots of different channels for an autistic person to advocate. Let an autistic person to stim or to regulate themselves. And also kind of help them to connect with other autistic or neurodivergent employees if there are other neurodivergent employees working within the organization. And I suppose the final thing I would also kind of say as well would be to support, the final things I would say in terms of supporting an autistic person to advocate for themselves at work. And these are kind of wider organizational changes. So these include mainstreaming autism and disability into your wider workplace policies and practices. Consulting or seeking the input of autistic staff members if there are any organization-wide changes planned. Providing information around autism understanding and acceptance from reputable sources such as AsIAM, Specialist, and other autistic self-advocates is really important. And the final thing would be to also kind of always ask an autistic person if they want to be included in anything that your organization does outside of working hours. So yeah, so that's all from me. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me, and I'll be working to have any questions you might have after the masterclass.
Thank you so much for that, Adrian. Lots of really helpful tips in there. So our second speaker today is going to be Elaine Chapman. Elaine is a library assistant working for TU Dublin. Her areas of interest are universal design, accessibility, and neurodiversity. And she was diagnosed as autistic as an adult and recently diagnosed with POTS and dysautonomia. So I'm delighted to hand you over to Elaine if you want to turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And she'll have some really good input.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I'll just start the screen share now. Where's my... Sorry, 1 second. There we go. Now, I'm Elaine. I work as a library assistant in TU Dublin. It's kind of a job that I fell into, but definitely feels like I'm where I'm meant to be. I went through college undiagnosed and graduated with my bachelor's degree in English and history during the recession in 2012. Where there were very, very few jobs available. Luckily, what was available was a student grant to do a master's degree. It was the last year that grant was available. Scrolling through university sites, I came across the Master's in Library and Information Studies in UCD. I thought it sounded great, you know. I love books and kind of like people. But the job is more than that. It's connecting people to what they need. It's also surprisingly highly social and sensory, yet it's still a profession that's definitely full of neurodiverse, chronically ill or disabled people. I was only diagnosed as autistic a month before joining TU Dublin, so chose to be open with them at my interview about it, so that they could know I was still figuring my needs out and that there may be bumps in the road. They were always open to hearing what I needed and what I was interested in working on. So this has actually been quite an exciting time to be involved in TU Dublin too. As part of becoming a university, we have created a new strategic plan that has 3 core tenets: people, planet, and partnership. Under the tenet of people, some of the aims listed are to become the most accessible university in Ireland, to adopt a dynamic new model of education, producing the most highly sought after digitally literate graduates. And we will be recognised as an exemplar in equality, diversity and inclusion, where people are proud to be part of a connected community, and their talents, aptitude and agility will create a real impact on the global stage. These will be achieved with the help of practical milestones. These milestones were created before COVID and may be suitable for adaptation given what we've learned during the last year, particularly regarding the adaptability of online learning for our students. We will have 1/3 of offerings delivered through multiple pathways. Diversity ratios will be in the top decile nationally, and we will be the largest provider of lifelong learning for industry and the professions. We will have built a body of high caliber staff supported by comprehensive staff engagement and development programs. And lastly, delivery of almost 2/3 of planned infrastructural campus developments as per the University Master Plan. Now, our strategic plan also has a name: Infinite Possibilities. We want our students and staff to be able to achieve whatever they want in life. Don't get me wrong though, we do have a long way to go to reach those goals, partly because universities in general are just not known to be the most accessible places for staff or students. As part of the redesign of the university, library services will hopefully be getting an accessibility and universal design team as part of our user services section. This is definitely the team that I want to wind up in. I think it will be a delightful place for advocates to work in. If this unit is created and I make it onto it, it will have been my advocacy and self-advocacy at work that got me there. Now, I'm not a manager at work, but I think part of successful management lies in knowing your staff, knowing their interests, and finding ways that they can embrace at least some of those interests through work. Luckily, I found a workplace that does just that. One of the things that I have loved here is the flexibility and openness of management, not just to me, but to all staff. Flexibility on behalf of the employer is key to successfully employing neurodiverse people. And if it were me, I wouldn't be quiet about it either. Shout it from the rooftops. Something that I advise every job-seeking neurodivergent person is to limit the jobs that you apply for. Don't apply to every single job you see. Instead, take that energy and use it to research companies you're applying to. Find out what their policies are around disability and diversity. Find out if they have positive or negative history around equality. Treat these companies like they are your new special interests, because how they treat their employees is very much in your interest. I also firmly believe in using disclosure during the application process, particularly as a way to sound out the company's reaction to you having a disability. Thankfully for me, with TU Dublin, I got a good reaction even from the point of disclosure. I have, on the flip side, had places respond very negatively to my autism and previously dyspraxia diagnosis in interviews and in the workplace, which is the reason that I advise other people to be upfront about it. Disclosure can also be a form of self-protection and advocacy, and seeing how a potential employer responds to it can tell you a lot about what it would be like to work for them. In TU Dublin, we are trying to recruit more diverse staff with the motto "Recruiting Difference, Reflecting Diversity" displayed proudly on the front of our job advertisements. This is because we as an institution have come to recognise that having staff that can anticipate and acknowledge the needs of our students is important. Likewise, representation in academia is important if we want to attract minority students as potential workers. A little bugbear of mine is when employers hide their diversity or equality statements at the end of a job application. That to me says, we'll tolerate you if we have to. That's not the kind of message that you want to be sending out. You want to be sending out we want you and we will do whatever it takes to get you message. And believe me, you do want us. Diverse staff are better able to meet the needs of diverse customers, students, or service users because we have experienced the flaws in the system. We are experts by design. One thing that I have noticed is that when workplaces work on becoming more diverse, they often focus on one disability at a time, and arguably ones that are viewed as milder as that. The reality, though, is that disabilities rarely exist in isolation. Many people who are disabled will have more than one disability or chronic illness. Using myself as an example here, I was diagnosed as dyspraxic at age 4, autistic at age 27, and recently with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, also known as POTS, and dysautonomia. For me, an approach that looks at just my autism is not one that works. I've heard quite a bit from other activists about workplaces that are accessible for one disability, but not another. There does need to be an overarching approach to accessibility and flexibility in the workplace for them to be accessible. Even speaking just about neurodivergent people, we need to look at all of the potential conditions and needs, yet also look at the individual's needs. Both the big picture and the small picture need to be seen in tandem. Going a bit more big picture here, we say we want neurodiversity in the workplace, but there needs to be a good hard look at the barriers that are preventing us from getting there in the first place. A large part of that involves continuous examination of our education system in this country and putting pressure on it to adapt, because until disabled people can successfully navigate our education system, they're not going to be able to make it to the workplace. This does include employers speaking up as allies and connecting with local schools, whether or not you're currently knowingly employing disabled people. Believe me when I say that it is in your interest that we get through the system, because we can bring experiences that other people do not have. Likewise, from every other marginalized identity, we all have different experiences that can benefit society. It is especially important, though, to consider those who have multiple marginalizations, also known as intersectional identities. Thankfully, in work, I've been given a lot of freedom to research various topics that arise around accessibility. And two of the most important to me are intersectionality and universal design. Intersectionality is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. She argued that her identities of being Black and being a woman could not be separated, but instead are intersected and interwoven. Likewise, autistic women, especially those from an ethnic minority, have likely experienced the disadvantages that having intersectional identities can bring, but also know just how interwoven those identities can be. We all certainly know how hard it is to get a diagnosis in this country, but it is harder again for females to get diagnosed. My experience of the world is one of an autistic woman, not one of a woman and an autistic person. The world might see my identities separately, but I cannot, as each influences the other, and both happen concurrently. Lydia X.C. Brown once said, "You can't address ableism without addressing race," and both disabledness and abledness are defined based on proximity to and approximation of whiteness as an idea. In addition to this, being female has also historically been considered less valuable to white capitalist society. When someone has all three of those identities, they are triply disadvantaged. In Ireland, for example, we need to look at access to diagnosis for traveller children and those coming through the asylum system. That may all seem like it's been a bit off topic for a talk on neurodiversity at work, but to me, we won't have neurodiversity at work until all neurodivergent people who have the desire to work are given access to workplaces. To that effect, there is one key concept that ties it all in, and that is universal design. Universal design is something that I've been given the support to look into at work, and it is a relatively simple concept. It basically involves looking at the needs of the most marginalized in society and taking their needs as a basis to create good design. Accessibility is the baseline for universal design. We don't need stairs or a ramp. What we need is a leveled entrance. Everyone can use a leveled entrance. In terms of things we are doing directly in my workplace to embrace universal design, here are some examples. We are utilizing fire evacuation lifts, something that they would not have been aware without me. We will have assistive technology available to all students to loan through the library. We have an online assistive technology repository. We are running classes for our educators on universal design for learning. We are creating a VR tour of the new library building, an idea that was proposed by myself and a neurodivergent student. We have created an ability network to focus on issues faced by disabled staff and students, another idea proposed by myself and that same student. These are changes that just one or two neurodivergent voices caused in one of Ireland's largest universities when they were given the support to do so. To be honest, sometimes the best support you can give individual neurodivergent people is to believe in us, and watch the changes we can make when you do. Right. There we go. Lastly, for neurodivergent people, at least, please skip the return to normal. As Morticia Adams once said, normal is an illusion. What is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. We have learned a lot of what is possible in terms of workplace adaptability in the last year. There have been many hardships, so let's not lose the few benefits it has brought. There are many of your staff who will need the option to work from home from at least time to time, so find out how to make it happen. Don't do normal, do better. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And I loved your last point there about don't do normal, do better. That's really brilliant. And we have a similar one in AsIAM where we say normal is a setting on your washing machine. It is not a word that can be used to describe a person. So now I'm going to hand you over to our third and final speaker, Danny Burke. Danny is a late diagnosed neurodivergent adult. She works part-time as a peer connector in an out-of-hours mental health cafe. Danny is also on a number of local and national working groups related to mental health and autism in the HSE. She's part of a team researching autistic adult experiences of psychiatry and is also an autistic representative on other research projects. So I'll hand you over to Danny now, if you would like to turn on your mic and your camera.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I'll just get my slides up. Brilliant. Cool. So hi, everybody. I'm Danny Burke, and welcome to my short presentation on self-advocacy in the workplace. Cool. So a bit about me. I am 32 years old. As Hannah mentioned, I've late diagnosed autism and ADHD, and likely undiagnosed dyslexia and dyspraxia. So like a lot of other people, I didn't know I was neurodivergent until much later in life, and I spent many years unable to work and quite unwell mentally from just, I guess, not knowing that I was different and really struggling to navigate the world. So now I work part-time in an out-of-hours mental health cafe, and that cafe, so it's a kind of unique position. I got involved in a local forum. So there's local forums around the country for the different counties where people with lived experience can get involved in, I suppose, trying to see what changes can be made from in the health system together, and trying to find solutions and inputting them into the HSE, whether that's through different working groups or different projects. So through our local forum in Galway, we set up this cafe. So so the cafe is run by people with lived experience of mental health difficulties. So it's quite a unique workplace in that sense. So we're open Thursday to Sundays for people that just want to have a chat, or if somebody's having a mental health crisis, whatever it is, it can be even somebody's good news. So we're just trying to have a space for people to come that is just welcoming and safe and a non-judgmental space. So as Hannah mentioned, I also do research and co-production consultancy. So I'm on a few different groups looking at models of care or different surveys or pilot projects related to autism and mental health, which are some of my interests. So employment. So this is a paraphrased conversation that I had with a friend recently, and it's related to just, I suppose, the guilt sometimes people can feel if they're not in a position to be employed as well. So some of my response was that sometimes people can work and sometimes they can't. Both are okay. Some people can only work in specific jobs part-time or for a few months or years. And working can improve some people's mental and physical health. For others, it can do the opposite, and sometimes it's a mix of both. But what's most important is someone's physical and mental well-being. So as Elaine said earlier, to be specific about, where you apply to and what kind of jobs, because, not every job is for everybody. So there's a reason why we specialize in different areas and kind of are more drawn to different areas. We're not all going to be suited to every job, and particularly if you are disabled or from other marginalized identities, sometimes there's certain jobs that will just suit you better, and just depending on your own skills. So and as well, to not feel guilt if you aren't in a position to work right now or ever in somebody's lifetime. There's plenty of other ways that people can live their lives. It doesn't have to be through employment. So if somebody isn't able to, that's okay. And as Elaine said, there's a lot of intersectionality. People are rarely just autistic. So some people have chronic conditions or other disabilities that mean at the moment they may not be able to work, and that's perfectly okay. But for those that do want to work, have a bit of structure and earn a bit of extra money, it's a good option as well to find something that suits you. So disclosing disabilities. So not everyone is comfortable disclosing disabilities to future employers, and it's not safe for everyone to disclose and can lead to discrimination for some. Disclosure can also lead to discrimination, especially when the recipient has high stigma towards autism. And in studies involving autistic job candidates, potential employers showed a clear preference towards hiring non-autistic employees over autistic individuals. Also, an estimated 16% of autistic people are in full-time work employment and 32% in any form of paid work, compared to 47% for other disability groups and 80% employment for the general adult population. So even within disabled groups, autistic people are often don't even have the same opportunities as other disabled people, and reasonable accommodations when they are requested and needed. For some, they are still left dissatisfied with the adjustments that have been made. So it's important that people are welcomed into spaces and people can find solutions to make it possible for that person to work. So as I mentioned, like the place I work in, the cafe, I'm in a privileged position that, the people working there all have lived experience of mental health difficulties as well. And while, people may not have all the same differences I have, people have their own experiences to bring to the table. So we do have a workforce that are very understanding. And even in our operational group for the project, like I'm very privileged in the sense that I was involved in setting up this pilot project before I got the job there. So not everyone else has that insight and that kind of, so I was used to the setup and knew what it would look like before I went in the door. So I'm very fortunate in that sense. So not everyone is going to have that experience that can help. And in my job, I was very honest from the beginning about disclosing. So if you Google my name, you'll find articles about me talking about being autistic and ADHD and stuff. So I can't hide it anyways, and I am not able to mask. So it would be fairly soon that I'd be found out if I were to hide that. But I understand why people do feel they need to as well. But I was, upfront in my interview, and when I started work as well, myself and my colleagues I requested that we could do a sensory audit of the place to see if there's any things that could come up that I might struggle with. So we did a sensory audit of the place and like tried out different places that I could sit so I'm least distracted by lots of people going by outside or just sounds and different things. So just finding a few different areas that I could sit that I'm not going to have too many things pulling my attention away. We also tested out like the volumes for the playlists and the music because we, as I said, work in a cafe and people will be having confidential conversations. So we have some background music playing, but that can also be distracting sometimes. So trying to find what music works. So we tried out different playlists and different volumes and found like music with no words in it, just relaxing music was helpful. So we played that, or else 80s music or 90s music playlists. So we do enjoy that as well. But sometimes we'll switch back to the more ambient music. So it's just trying to find compromises. I find current chart music quite intolerable to listen to. So I find that a bit overwhelming, and I don't think others want to be subjected to my taste like Enya and things. But I do come in to work when I'm in a bit early and I'll put on some of my music pretty loud on the speakers, which I do enjoy as well. But I can also wear noise cancelling headphones if needed. So sometimes I'll just, if I need a break, I'll put on my headphones and just kind of dance away to myself, listening to music in a corner, or go outside, or, you know, if I'm in the cafe and it was really busy while I'm working with a customer, I'd be able to use my headphones, but I have not needed to do that as of yet anyways. Also, patience when teaching new skills has been really important. So my colleagues have been just fantastic, and sometimes it takes me longer to like learn new things. So particularly Rachel has been very patient with me, teaching me things to do with the laptop and technology, because I don't know how other people find these things, but it can be a bit hard to keep track of several platforms. So particularly since COVID times, I've had to learn a lot more things to use. So between my paid job and other voluntary roles and other things I'm doing, I have so many different platforms to follow. Like I have Attend Anywhere and Zoom and Skype and Slack and Dropbox and Basecamp, and I've another few that I can't even think of right now. So there's a lot of different forums to make sense of. So sometimes it just takes a bit longer for some people, and yeah, it's been really helpful having that patience and understanding, and teaching me things as well on the computer that can make my work a bit more efficient and easier to track and manage has been really helpful. So I also sometimes use things to fidget with. So right now I have this stone with, it also has a bit of melted candle wax on it. So just things I can just fidget with when I'm at work that help me regulate and just concentrate as well, are really helpful. And, you know, nobody pays any notice of it, because we all fidget anyways, just differently sometimes. Also like working from home when I'm working on long documents. So, you know, my job as a peer connector is giving people support, but as well as doing that kind of work, there's also, you know, writing emails and documents as well. So stuff like emails and short things I can do in work, but I find if I'm working on any like larger pieces, I find that impossible to do in my workplace because there's too many distractions. So like that, I'd work on long documents at home where I can properly be hyper focused and relaxed in my own environment and not have those distractions and be more productive. So having that flexibility is really important. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to work as effectively. And also with like meetings. So COVID obviously has meant we've had to do a lot of remote meetings. So I have a mixture of, for the cafe that I work in, there's an operational group. We have those meetings online, which is really helpful as well to not always have to go in person. And then for my direct cafe team, we have like meetings in person. So both are good to have as well, and having a mixture, but also having other ways that people can input into conversations. But it's just helpful to not enforce somebody going into a meeting in person, or whether online, it's whatever. If a person can do another method, that means they can still participate. Just be flexible, because sometimes it just will take too much effort for that person to go in person for various reasons. So flexibility is really important. And I identified a safe place nearby that I can access when I need. So not every work environment is going to have like a quiet room you can go to chill out when you need, or a space for winding down. So it's, even if you can't find a place in the workplace, trying to find somewhere nearby. So there's like a playground down the road from my workplace that I go down to on the swing. If you haven't gone on a swing lately, give it a try. It's great fun. But yeah, having that kind of thing is really important. So sometimes I'll go on the swings before I go into work. And as well, sometimes if I have work meetings or training to do, I will go and sit on the grass by a tree in the university grounds across the road from work, which is a really nice, relaxing space to do meetings, because, you know, meetings can be a bit stressful sometimes too. And it's just nice to be in a nice environment. So yeah, just having that flexibility has been just massively important for me. And I'm just really grateful for such an understanding team and the operational team as well. So it just makes a big difference for people being able to do their jobs. So an open, non-judgmental communication for understanding workplace culture. So communication is key. If there's any issues that are coming up in work, or somebody's feeling uncomfortable, or they're finding something hard, is having those opportunities to communicate those, and for people to not take it personally or criticize that person. It's just really important that people are open when people do come with any issues that they have. Because I certainly know I do, and I'm sure other people do, when you're trying to bring somebody up with something, trying to bring something up with somebody that's important to you and that would mean a lot to you. Sometimes that can be a really nervous experience, and feeling anxiety about how it could be perceived, or how to say it, because as well, like, a lot of autistic people might not have much of a filter or can't script, or have different ways of communicating. So that can be sometimes an anxiety provoking thing to do. So trying to just be understanding about what the message is that person is trying to communicate, and how you could be helpful. And that when miscommunications do happen, that it's normal. So, you know, it's not necessarily the fault of the autistic persons, it's just things sometimes just get lost, or just picked up differently. So it's just trying to, you know, find solutions and move on, and see how miscommunications can be reduced in the future, but not assigning any blame. So yeah, and working with my colleagues, we've just strived to find mutually agreeable solutions, like we did with the music or different things, is trying to see what works for everyone. Because as Adrian, I think, mentioned, that like sometimes we have competing needs, you know, not everyone's needs are always able to be met 100%. So it's trying to find, okay, well, what can we do that everyone's happy to try and move forward with. And also like checking in with each other. So myself and my colleagues would regularly, like throughout the day, you know, check in with each other to see how people are doing, and, you know, if there's something that's coming up. And it's just normalizing that into your workday, but also not like hounding people for about how they are and stuff. It's gauging what's comfortable for that person. So just having that space where people can just have those conversations. And again, like just regular team meetings and opportunities to give feedback. So, you know, some people find it really stressful going to team meetings, and the whole experience is just too much for them. So maybe if that's difficult for them to do, can they, you know, join the meeting online, turn their camera off, or can they just send feedback through an email, or can they watch a recording of the meeting and send feedback to try see what will work for that person. And on that with the cameras, like I find at the start of meetings, I'll turn my camera on and say hi to people and stuff, and then I turn it off. I just find it easier to not feel kind of watched, I guess, particularly, you know, sometimes we're working from home and we're bringing people into our own home environments, which can be really personal and vulnerable as well. So I think it's important that we all can assert our boundaries and not feel pressured into doing things we're uncomfortable with. So self-advocacy again. So employees need to feel safe to advocate for themselves. It's really important that there's a safe culture that people can express their needs, and everyone needs support, and it may look different for different people, and that's okay. You know, we all have different needs. There's no one size fits all, and nobody's needs are yeah, they're all just needs, but they might look differently. Also, needs can change day to day or over time. So what someone needs today or this morning can be different to later on today or tomorrow or in a year's time. So it's just trying to go with what works in that moment. Like sometimes for me, like phone calls or speaking in person can be more overwhelming than like texting or typing, whereas other times it can be the opposite. So just trying to go with what works in that moment, and just continually checking in. And if people do bring up what they'd like support with, to just try and be understanding. And all forms of communication are valid. So again, like people have different ways of communicating. Sometimes it's body language, other times it's, you know, texting, typing, using AAC devices, sign language, different ways. But often we're so caught up in the verbal side that we can kind of miss other ways. But just trying to be open to that. Like sometimes if I'm in a meeting, I know I won't remember my points or things I want to bring up, so I will type out on my note application on my phone what I want to say, and then when I'm in the meeting, I'll just read that out, and I find that really helpful. So it's just being open to that and not thinking that's, you know, weird or something. I'm just not able to script at all. I don't have the ability to script, and it's really important for me to be able to write things down so I don't lose track. So thank you. That is my presentation, my short presentation. I just left the contact details at the top for the cafe that I'm working in, Galway Community Cafe. At the bottom are my details. So thank you, everybody, and hope you all have a good day.
Thank you so much for that, Danny. It was really, really brilliant. And thank you to all our speakers, to Elaine, to Adrian. If you want to turn your cameras on just for the final farewell. Thank you so much for coming along today. Thank you for your input and all the preparation that you put in to the talks that you gave today. I know from the feedback that's coming in through the chat here, it's much appreciated. And I think it says a lot as well that there are no questions. So I think anyone's questions must have been answered in all of your individual presentations. So thanks so much again to our speakers. Thank you to our participants who came along, who took time out of their day to come along here. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you at the next masterclass, which we will let you know about the date for in the coming weeks. So have a lovely rest of your day, everyone. And thank you so much. Goodbye.